leads. We're going to start by talking about the stuff that you guys already know, just to quickly review. Leads should be fewer than 35 words. So if you're copy editing a lead and it's longer than that, you want to see what you can do to get it down below that. Lead should be one sentence. They typically start with who or what. They generally include where and when, but do not typically, well, I said include where and when, but do not typically start with when. So there's a rule there. If you don't already know it, you should make note to yourself that your lead should typically not start with when. If you're copy editing a lead and say the date is the first thing, look at, is that the most important thing? Is that date the most important information? Because the most important information should really come first. And if it's a when, it's probably not the most important. Also, you can include why or how. Now, things that are new to you, things that if you've looked at the chapter, there's a number of bullet points here of things that the chapter outlines as far as lead rules go. I want to highlight separately active voice when possible. So we're going to talk about the difference between active and passive voice, and the idea being that usually active is better, it sounds better and is cleaner, but passive is not necessarily wrong. It sometimes can be improved upon. Okay, so let's just real quickly touch on these bullet points. The no news lead, that's when you have information that doesn't tell you anything, like the city council met last week. Okay, great, what did they do? Buried news leads, that's when you have a ton of information and the important stuff is not at the beginning. Too long leads, again, buried information. Definition leads, I think you guys know not to do those. Those are basically when you're saying, well, they call, the new vehicle that's going to be out the Lightning. But the Webster's Dictionary says the Lightning is da-da-da-da-da-da, that kind of thing. We're not messing with the Webster's Dictionary. Direct quotation leads, you don't want to quote someone in the lead. You may want to say what they said, but you don't want to directly quote them with quotation marks. Cliche leads, if you're not familiar with those, look at those in your book. Weak beginnings we'll talk about a little bit before we finish here. So let's start with active voice. If you were in my news reporting and writing class, you may have seen this picture before. I like this lady getting arrested for being drunk at the library. I actually don't know who this lady is. I just picked the picture. But I like the idea that she got arrested for drunkenness at the Statesboro Bullitt County Library. Now, if she's getting arrested, is she being active or passive? Statesboro police arrested a woman. Is that active or is that passive? The subject is doing the action, so it's active. The Statesboro police are the subject here. What did they do? They arrested. The woman is the object. So the Statesboro police arrested. The subject acted. It's active. Now passive, if we turn it the other way and say a woman was arrested by the Statesboro police Sunday at the Statesboro Bullitt County Library for public drunkenness, then we're not looking at the subject being active. We're looking at a woman was arrested by the Statesboro police Sunday. So they're the ones doing the action at the Statesboro police, not the subject, the woman. The subject receives the action. Sometimes you can't avoid using passive voice. Sometimes that's the best alternative. This is a story that started out, the lead says, the decision is in and the U.S. women's gymnastics team for the 2024 Paris Olympics has been finalized. So has been finalized is passive, but there's not another good way to say this without saying who did the finalizing, right? If we're going to put the action in there by the subject, then it would say the Olympic Committee made the decision and the Olympics team has been finalized, right? But really the most important thing is this decision's been made. So it's being written in a passive way knowingly. Another good example of passive, this was just President Joe Biden was sworn in on a cold January morning. Was sworn in as passive, right? If it were going to be active, it would have to say who did the swearing in. So, and I honestly don't know who that is, we'll just say the person in charge swore President Biden in on a cold January morning. Now we're active, okay? But you see why passive would be better there because we want to focus on Joe Biden. Simple, straightforward, active, the subject does the action. Passive, the subject receives the action. So if you can figure out who your subject is, you can figure out active and passive voice. Now, I won't say it's simple. There are some tricks to kind of help you if you need that. In passive and active voice, one of the things that we talk about is looking at who is doing the action, right? The subject does the action. The boy bounced the ball. Or if it's passive, the subject receives the action. The ball was bounced by the boy. Okay, so the subject does the action. If we can't quite determine if that's the case, we can try a little trick called with zombies. So by putting with zombies after the verb, you can tell if it makes sense, and if it does, it's passive. So the with zombies test basically adds a subject. It puts someone to perform the action in the sentence. It looks like this. The boy bounced with zombies the ball, because we put it in after the verb, bounced. The boy bounced with zombies the ball. Doesn't really make much. That doesn't sound right to me. The ball was bounced with zombies by the boy. Still sounds a little weird, but it works as a sentence. The ball was bounced with zombies by the boy. So you see how the passive here, we figured it out by putting with zombies after the verb. Okay, so you might try that with a couple sentences and just see how that treats you. If it's helpful to you, then great. Another thing I want to mention that your book, I don't think your chapter mentions, the immediate identification lead and delayed identification lead. And this is going to be familiar probably to most of you already, but just to kind of review, because there's a few things in the quiz this week. So you use immediate identification when someone is well known to most of the audience. So when the person in your lead is a name that we know, you use it in the lead. If it's not, or I'm sorry, we're going to stick with this. Immediate identification lead example. Statesboro Mayor Jonathan McCullough and 2 Statesboro residents were not seriously injured in a 2-car crash at the corner of Fair Road and Tillman Street Monday night. Okay, so we know who the mayor is, or most people in Statesboro know who the mayor is. So we're going to put his name in this story, in the lead, because his name is known. Now, we do not say who's in the other car because we don't know the names of the people, or even if we do, they're not known to us, if you know what I mean. In the other car, they're just 2 people that are regular people. So we're not going to put their name in the lead. It's delayed, meaning the name's not in the lead. If the person's name's not immediately recognized by most of the audience, do not use it in the lead. So for example, this is a recent one. Authorities in New York released body camera footage on Sunday showing a police officer fatally shooting a 13-year-old boy after he allegedly aimed an object that was later determined to be a pellet gun during a foot chase on Friday night. Now, just looking at that, I wonder how many words that is. It's a lot of words. But it's a complicated story. It's a complicated scenario because you want to get the pellet gun in there if you can. But we don't know the boy's name. His name is not going to mean anything to us at this point. Now, at some point later on, if this becomes a case that's nationally known, his name might be in the, you would see, for example, Mike Brown in the news because his name has become nationally known. So that may be the case with this individual as well. But for now, it's delayed because we don't know. We aren't familiar with his name. All right, a few weak beginnings I want to mention. I think I alluded to this at the beginning. Starting with when is not the best way to start a lead, almost ever. On Thursday night, the Board of Governors agreed to create 2 positions to save money in its maintenance operations. If you just switch it so that on Thursday night comes at the end, it's a much more powerful sentence. And that's going to be the case for almost any time you see a lead that's a win. You just need to usually stick it at the end or somewhere else in the lead. It's not that we don't care, it's just that's not the most important thing. Attribution, this one, basically if you find yourself having to attribute something in a lead, make sure that you've got the most important information first. So Georgia Southern Police said Wednesday that cars parked along Sweetheart Circle will have to be moved before Saturday's game. What's the most important thing here? The cars have to be moved, right? People want to know they have to move their cars. They don't want to get towed. So you can say cars parked along Sweetheart Circle will have to be moved before Saturday's game, according to Georgia Southern Police, or Georgia Southern Police said, probably even better. According to, it's a tricky one. We try not to use it if we're not talking about a thing. We don't try to use it to talk about people. We try to use said always for people, and according to for things like the White House or the encyclopedia or something. Those are according to, it's not people. All right, one more. There is and there are. This is mentioned in your book, but I wanted to point it out because people always miss this question for some reason on this quiz. There's actually, I think there are 2 questions that allude to there is and there are not a good way to start a sentence. So there were 5 accidents on Interstate 16 Tuesday. 5 accidents occurred on Interstate 16 Tuesday is much better. So taking off of there were, there are, there is, the beginning of a lead can make it stronger, okay? All right, let me see if there's anything else I want to mention to you guys that was on that quiz that would be helpful. There is, there are, there were, starting with a number. For those of you who haven't run into this yet, when you start a sentence with a number, you have to spell it out unless it's a year. If it's a year, you can use a number all day long. Any other kind of number, any other reason for having a number at the beginning of the sentence, it has to be spelled out. Even if it's over 10, it still gets spelled out at the beginning of a sentence. All right, I think that was what I want to go over. Now, I've got for you guys here just a few leads that are problematic that I thought you might want to check out and fix. But this isn't something you have to do. This isn't a required piece. So if you're done and you don't want to listen to me anymore, then that's all right. You don't have to. But if you think you could take a little more, let's look at some leads. So during a press conference in her office at 8 a.m. today, Mayor Sabrina DeTolli spoke about the city's need for more parks. I think I've used these in news reporting writing, so these might be somewhat familiar. Sorry, let me just do this correctly. So what is wrong here? What are we not getting? During a press conference, is that the most important part? No. Who's the actor? What did they do? Mayor Sabrina DeTolli spoke. So that's how we want to start. Mayor Sabrina DeTolli spoke about the city's need for more parks during a press conference today. Quickies convenience store on Frederick Avenue was robbed by a masked gunman early Sunday morning. What do you see wrong there? I'm going to go to the next one. If you want to pause and give it a second and think about it, do that. A masked gunman robbed Quickies convenience store on Frederick Avenue early Sunday morning. So the difference here was that this was passive. The original sentence was passive, and this is active. A memorial to blind Willie McTell was dedicated in front of the Convention and Visitors Bureau last week by the Blue Mile Committee. McTell was the legendary blues musician who moved to Statesboro and wrote the famous Statesboro Blues, sung by Taj Mahal and later the Allman Brothers Band. I can tell you that's too many words because it's really long and I get out of breath. What would you do? Think about what you would do to make this more concise, okay? Because that's our problem here. What would you do to make it more concise? Pause if you want to, write up what you think, and then we'll move on to the next one. So we came up with the Blue Mile Committee dedicated because that's who did the action. A memorial to blind Willie McTell, the legendary blues musician who wrote Statesboro Blues last week. Kind of sounds like he wrote music last week. Maybe I should have just said the legendary blues musician who wrote Statesboro Blues. Blue Mile Committee dedicated a memorial last week. Let's put last week right there. Okay. Georgia Southern's campus recreation and intramurals began their annual, these are written by students, not to say anything negative. I'm just letting you know that's where they came from. Began their annual intramural bowling tournament February 11th, which provides a competitive environment for those who enjoy bowling and who like to compete against other students and professors for the title of intramural bowling champions. Too many words again and confusing. What's happening here? This group has begun their bowling tournament, right? All right, pause it if you want to. I'm going to go on. And that's really all we need. Georgia Southern's campus recreation and intramural began their annual intramural bowling tournament February 11th. That's really all we need to know. Everything else can go in the next paragraph. Okay, I think that's the last one. All right, have fun with leads, you guys.